Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. If you need my one-on-one help, go ahead and go to residency.teachable.com and kind of pick what you need help with, letter of intent, CV, or interview. And the one thing I'm going to talk about today with the PGY-2s is I'm kind of doing the PGY-2s and helping people with PPS is PGY-2 is very different. Where PGY-1 is kind of this mad dash and very local in terms of where they pull. Generally, PGY-2s are very regional. That is, if they're not from the same state or the same couple of schools, it at least will be in the same region, like Midwest, South, East, or West, or something like that. And that comes from a number of reasons. Usually it has a lot to do with relationships with the schools and that they've already seen the students before. They've done APPEs there and things like that. But PGY-2 is the Wild West, and it is completely different. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you want to read the statistics and how you can look at your own school's numbers and kind of make a better decision as to where you want to apply as a PGY-1 to certain schools, or certain residencies. In general, and again, this is blanket statements are not really good with residency, but in general, it is better to have the option, I'm not saying you have to take it, but it is better to have the option to early commit, and I'll talk about why. So what's happening is a number of people in PPS are not putting a little bio telling what specialty they want, and so the employer's like, well, what is this person trying to do, or what job do they want? Or they didn't select some kind of specialty practice area, so they're just kind of feeling the waters, and what you want to do is be very intentional about that. Also, on this post, they said that oncology, emergency medicine, and peds were three of the hot PGY-2s of this year. And we'll look at the historical data to kind of see what that means and how you can kind of tell which ones are a little bit hotter and which ones maybe a little bit cooler. All right. So again, residency.teachable.com if you want my one-on-one help with PGY-2 or PGY-1. But when you're doing PGY-2, I just want you to know that it is completely different, really. You've got a much smaller group of applicants. They're expecting page and a half, 2 pages. They're expecting a good conversation about what you've done in PGY-1 and really to be someone who's becoming an expert in the field. And it truly makes sense to do a PGY-2, and it should be clear from your documents, not just your CV, but also your letter of intent. And a lot of times it's reflective. You're writing your letter and you're like, this feels right, or this doesn't feel right, what's going on, and I can always help you with that stuff. All right, well, let's go to ASHP match and the statistics of the match. And the historical match statistics will give you a summary, applicants, residency and programs, and schools. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the summary and we're going to focus on the schools. Okay, so let's start with the summary and the PGY-2 programs, and I can make this quite a bit bigger here. The first thing we want to do is kind of get a baseline. So when we look at early commits, okay, with positions, and that's really what we care about, let's round this up to 1,500 PGY-2 positions, and that 500 were filled early. Now it's a little closer to 600. But we're saying that over 1/3 of positions were filled early, so a little bit over 1/3. So that's going to be our baseline. If something is not filled early, we can see that that is someplace or a particular discipline that we might take a chance and go to a PGY-1 that does not have an early commit option. But the more early commits you see percentage-wise, the less likely you're going to be able to go from a PGY-1 to that PGY-2. So we can take one of the toughest ones, which is solid organ transplant. So when you're looking at solid organ transplant as a PGY-2, and I know it's one of the smaller ones, over half, 51%, have been early committed. And it's kind of like seats taken. And it's really hard to get those because there's just not that many spots. There's only going to be 27 spots left. And in terms of, it doesn't give you any kind of geographic ranking or anything like that, but we can make a good assumption that if it's a nice place to live, pays good, opportunities are there afterwards, that's somebody that's going to early commit. If it's a place that's maybe not quite as desirable in terms of the where it is or the pay or whatever factors, then it might go into not being filled early. Now, this isn't always true. The quality of the program might just decide that we just don't want to fill early. We want to have the opportunity to look for other people, and that's, of course, their right to do whatever they want. But when we look at the numbers, what we want to look at is, okay, are they at that kind of third, if you want to just kind of ballpark the figures? So although it's really 39% or 40% are filled early, what we want to do is say, okay, well, if it's above that 40%, then it's going to be a little bit harder to get that position. And if it's far below that 40%, then it's going to be a little bit easier. So this would be one of the harder ones, solid organ transplant. Well, let's look at that Reddit post that said oncology, emergency medicine, and pediatrics were 3 of the toughest. Okay, so we'll take a quick look here. So emergency medicine comes first, or alphabetically, and so we can take that number 31 divided by 88, and we see that it's 35%. So we can see that with emergency medicine, the early commit rate is lower than our baseline of about 40%. So we can see that maybe while it might feel like a lot of people are applying to emergency medicine, and there might be a bunch, we're seeing that in general, there's going to be more percentage-wise spots available. Okay, so it's not something that a number of people have early committed that's over that kind of median. So with emergency medicine, maybe I disagree with that a little bit in terms of, and I know that hundreds of people could be applying for those 57 spots, but I'll show you how the data doesn't really play that out. But what I'm saying is, when you look at it and you're saying, looking at a specialty, because a lot of times what I see is I want to be either, however you pronounce it, emergency medicine or critical care, or maybe they go super specific like cardiology or something like that. And what you want to do is, okay, well, numbers wise, does it make sense for me to go to a place that has an early commit in critical care, or am I going to have a reasonable chance? Okay, so emergency medicine, that actually falls below that 40%. Okay, let's take a second and look at oncology. So 96 out of 211, and again, I'm doing positions. Okay, divided by 211, that gives me 45%. So that's a bit above that 40% that we're going to expect overall. And so maybe oncology is a little bit less available. You've got 45% of the people that of those positions that were taken already, and then that means that 55% of the positions are still available afterwards. And then with pediatrics, the nice 46 out of 100, it works out to be about the same. So pediatrics is a little bit above that line, and so pediatrics is also a place that generally we're going to see maybe a little bit more early commit than we are going to see availability to the outside as other ones are. Now, this is when you're just looking at the program, but now we can kind of take into account what's going on with the college that you attended and how that really affects it. So I'm going to give you some blanket advice first before we mess with this, in that if you are talking about where PGY-2s come from, PGY-2s generally come from all over. PGY-1s tend to be very regional. So especially with like Chicago medicine, you're going to see that their PGY-1 class is half of them are from Chicagoland. And it wasn't, if you rank like the schools, like USA Today rankings in the Chicagoland area, it doesn't really sort out that way. It just kind of says, okay, well, if you're from Chicagoland, one of those schools, half of our PGY-1 class is probably going to be from there. And then many of the other ones are going to be from the Midwest, but also some outstanding candidates nationally. But when you look at the PGY-2s, that flips on its head, where the expectation is that a much greater number of students are going to be coming from all over. And that makes sense. If somebody from, Cedars-Sinai or UNC hospitals, Kentucky hospitals, whatever, are applying to Chicago, well, you're certainly going to look at them as one of the top candidates based on where they're practicing in the academic medical center and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I want to first get kind of clear on what this data show. And let's go down kind of to the bottom here. There were 10 schools that had no PGY-1 applicant or PGY-2 applicants. For some, now every school in the country had at least one PGY-1 candidate or person that went into a PGY-1. Doesn't mean that everybody graduated, but there was somebody. And so for whatever reason, these students decided not to move on to PGY-2. So that's kind of a wash. You can't really say anything about those. The second group only was successful with early commits. So if you see your college in that group, I might strongly think about a place that's got a early commitment because, and again, there just isn't a lot of data because in some cases, the early commit kind of took out the one person that was in residency or that was going for a PGY-2 and they were done. There's no more applications to put in there. On the other hand, there were some that, they early committed, but then unfortunately those that kind of moved on were unsuccessful. So you want to really look at, okay, how did my school do from PGY-1 going to PGY-2? The next kind of big yellow thing here is saying that none of the students who graduated with PGY-1 went for a PGY-2 early commit. And that might be a cultural thing at their school where they're like, no, you should, kind of put your wings out there and give it a try and not early commit. Or it may have just been that it just happened to be a preference. But it's kind of shocking that some school that had so many 20 in PGY-1 like Albany had no early commits. But then they had a fantastic rate of matching afterwards where so 20 went in, and of those 16 got an interview. So only 4 didn't get an interview. And then of those 16, 12 matched. Okay, so an 80% match rate, and unfortunately, 4 were left unmatched. Okay, but when you're looking at the numbers, what you really care about is, well, when you look at what happened, 12 out of 20 that wanted a PGY-2 at one point in time, okay, didn't get it. So you're looking at around 60%. Okay, all right. Well, let's kind of go up to what I would call the more normal section, but what is not normal at all is that USA Today's rankings and this match group are completely at odds. Okay, these are schools that had a 100% match rate. That is, they either early committed or they matched, but at a rate of 100%. That is, not one single person from these colleges who went into PGY-2 applications to early committed did not get a residency. And I'll go through the schools. Let's see. So University of Utah, LeComm Bradenton, Roosevelt, Maryland Eastern Shore, New England College of Pharmacy, Thomas Jefferson, UCSD, Temple, Shenandoah, Lipscomb, Midwestern, Farley Dickinson, Cedarville, Concordia, UConn, Roseman, and Palm Beach Atlantic. And what you'll notice about this is that there are only, I believe, one. Let's kind of do this to help me. University of Utah, University of California, and University of Connecticut. So given that half of all pharmacy schools are public and half are private, only 3 publics were in a situation where they had 100% match. And so these smaller privates, though to be fair, the numbers are really small, like 2 applicants or 3 applicants, 4 applicants, whatever. These small privates matched at 100%, and that's, kudos to them. But then when you get under that line, all of a sudden you've got the USA Today kind of top 20, right? So you've got Kentucky in there, you've got UNC and Pitt and UCSF and number of other ones. My alma mater, Maryland, Baltimore, is in there with really, really, really high match rates. Okay, so as you're kind of looking at this, what you want to look at is, well, how does this group kind of choose? Were there a lot of early commits? Did they go into the match? And if they went into the match, were they successful? Where you want to really be careful is the bottom of this particular group. Okay? So there's kind of there's kind of two stories that can happen here. Either, let's take Mercer, for example, because this is kind of one of the most dramatic of them. Of the 15 that went in, only 6, so 6 early committed, and so there were 7 left. Okay, and of that, only 2 matched. And so you say, oh my gosh, 28% match rate. That's terrible. Not fair. Not fair. What happened was we have an early commit of 6. We're now down to 7, and 2 of those 7 matched. 2/3 of those that wanted a PGY-2 got it. Okay, so in many ways, the match rate can be very deceiving in this case because of the number of early commits. And so when you see a match rate of 40% and 50%, you're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. But then when you look at the actual number of people that went in and the actual number that got what they got, some kind of position, you're seeing 60, 70, as high as 88% got one when they were, getting into the match. So what I'm saying is that you have to be very cognizant of the data. So let's go to kind of the document itself and how to read this, and I'll show you how to do this with your own college. So I always pick on Auburn because it's alphabetically the first by state and school. But 17 registered and 5 went in for an early commit. Okay, so now you have, and you're going to see this happen from time to time. Like, whoa, even I know 17 minus 5 is 12, right? Well, somebody left and somebody said, well, I already got a job. I don't need to do this PGY-2 thing. So 11 are in and active with the list, and 8 have matched. So when we look at that 8 out of 11, that's outstanding to begin with. At a 72% match rate, anybody would be happy with a 72% match rate. But what we're not doing properly is including the early commits and the fact that somebody got a job and they didn't even go on to the PGY-2. So really, the better way to do this mathematically, if I was someone from Auburn, I'm going to say, well, kind of what are my chances of early committing or matching, which is really what you want to do. I would take that 16, okay, I would subtract that 3, okay, and I would say, all right, so it's really 13 divided by 16. 81% of those that registered with that PGY-2 match got a residency in PGY-2. So it's a little bit confusing. I think that it takes a little bit more work to do something like this. But I think it's absolutely essential that, especially if you're applying for PGY-1, that you look at what your school's strategy was with early commits versus going into the match. And I think that, if you do that, you're going to find that it's a lot closer to the actual than maybe the numbers would belie. Is that the word? Okay. Anyway, all right. Well, so kind of last point with this, where do I come in? Where do the documents come in? If you are writing your letter of intent, that's kind of what gets you that early commit, that you have responded internally to this internal position and said, hey, I really want to stay here. And this is why I think that staying here makes sense for both of us. And that might seem like a weird thing to say, but really what you're doing is you're convincing to some extent yourself, another residency year, awesome. But you're convincing yourself and the RPD that, why are you going to go out there and do that? Why are you going to look at all those applications again? Don't you have PGY-1 applications to look at? Look, let's just lock in this spot right now. Get that out of your way. You know that I'm here. I've done a good job. I've shown that I'm able to do this. And I think that we have a great working relationship, and I'd love to continue it as a PGY-2 here. Or you go into the fray, and now you're saying, all right, let me make my case for why I didn't do a PGY-1 there, but why I, as an external candidate, am someone that really, really should be there. And a lot of that is going to come from you're talking about their offerings in the PGY-2, and so important to look at their curriculum, so important to match your rotations, past and future, to what they offer. Okay. So again, I know that it may seem like, okay, look, I'm just trying to get a PGY-1, man. I'm just trying to get a residency here. And that might be enough for you, but I really think that going to a place that has an early commit option that you can, next fall look at and say, all right, well, let's kind of have that conversation and see if an early commit makes sense, because you might love the place, but then you might love the place and find out that they don't have an early commit, and that's kind of devastating. To know that now you've got to go in the pool, and that half of in general, overall, 40% of the positions are already taken. So let's put it a different way. Imagine going into the PGY-1 match and finding out that 40% of those 4,000 positions, 1,600, are already spoken for. Okay, are those ones that are already spoken for going to be the worst ones or the best ones, right? And to be fair, that some of those obviously would fall differently, but a lot of times it's literally impossible to get a particular PGY-2 at a particular place because they simply prefer to take their internal candidates. And that's a really tough thing to find out the hard way later that, oh man, although I'm at this amazing, site, maybe I'm at the Mayo, maybe I'm at UNC, maybe I'm at Kentucky or Cedars-Sinai or wherever, and to find out that, man, I wanted to go here, and even with my credentials, I can't because the seat's taken. It's just not available to you. Someone's already early committed, and that's the way they do things there. So if you are thinking about a PGY-2, I would strongly think about having that first option to early commit. No, there's no requirement to do that, but I think it will make your life a lot easier. So again, if you need me, residency.teachable.com. Email me, tonythepharmacist@gmail.com.